Greetings. My name is Dolley Madison. Welcome to the drawing room here at Montpelier. We are honored to have you as our guests and so pleased that you are interested in learning more about the United States Constitution and my husband, James Madison's role in establishing it. Now, Mr. Madison and I were not yet married at the time of the Constitutional Convention, so I am going to send you upstairs to see Kyle Stetz, who works here at Montpelier. He is going to tell you all about it.
My name is Kyle Stetz, and I'm the Director of Education and Visitor Engagement here at James Madison's Montpelier. And we're standing in the second floor of the main house here at Montpelier. And this is a room that today we call the Old Library. And as you can see behind me, we have hundreds of books. By Madison's retirement period, this room was filled with about 4,000 books. And this room, the way that we've curated it, the way that we show it off to visitors, is how it looked after James Madison was finished with his presidency. But really the key moment of this room and when James Madison was in this room was many, many years before. So I want to turn the clock back all the way to 1786. In 1786, this room was a bedroom. It looked nothing like this at all. So you imagine a bed and some other furniture in here. And this is where James Madison begins his research on what will eventually become some of the main components of the United States Constitution. So let's just do a brief little timeline recap. So the American Revolution starts in 1775. In 1776, we declare independence from England. And then it's going to take 5 years until we come up with our first form of government called the Articles of Confederation. And that is ratified and goes into effect in 1781. Just 2 years later, 1783, we sign the Treaty of Paris and we end the American Revolution. Now we're 3 years after that, 1786. We've been operating under this first form of government, and as you might know, it wasn't really getting the job done so well. And a lot of people realized that, including our guy, James Madison. And he wanted to do something about it. But he kind of had two problems. He didn't have a lot of free time on his hands, and he didn't have a huge library at this time. He wanted to start looking at forms of government that have existed throughout world history, throughout time. He needed to turn to resources. Couldn't just Google, hey, what are some awesome types of government that have worked for countries over the years? And so he turns to a new friend of his, a relatively new friend, and his name was Thomas Jefferson. And Jefferson was ambassador to France, and he was in Paris at the time. So James Madison sits down, he writes a letter, says, "Dear Tom, here's this giant list of books, kind of like my Amazon wish list of books that I'm looking for. Can you go book shopping for me while you're over in Paris?" And so Jefferson does that. He sends 2 huge crates of books over here to the United States. They arrive here at Montpelier, and Madison has them brought up to this bedroom, this room at the time. And Madison goes through them. He writes a letter back to Jefferson, and he says, "Thank you for this literary cargo, but you didn't find everything I want. Go find it." Madison dives down into these resources, into these books. He's looking at governments all the way back to the ancient Greeks and Romans. He's looking at governments that exist in the world at the time. And his research really kind of has 2 phases. Number one, he specifically wants to look at Confederate forms of government because that's what the Articles of Confederation was, a loose alliance of states with a very weak central government. And he does his research on his confederacies, and his conclusion is, they never seem to work. They never seem to work in the long run. And he says, well, why? Why is that? Why do they almost always end in failure? And his conclusion is that people always put their own self-interests above the good of the whole. And that's how we saw these individual 13 states operating at the time. They were putting their own state interests above the good of the so-called United States. And so he says, if this has never worked in the past, and it's not working in the present for other confederacies, including ours, why would we continue down this path that's likely going to end in failure? And so he says, what we need to do is not just fix the Articles of Confederation, we need to crumple them up, throw them out the window, and put some other form of government, some other type of government in place. And so that's the second phase of his research. What will be the best form of government for the United States to operate under? And he pretty quickly lands on a republic, a republican form of government. And that's what he begins to build his plan around. He takes this research with him to a big meeting, a convention that was supposed to take place in Annapolis, Maryland in the fall of 1786. One of the problems with the Articles of Confederation is that they had to have a meeting. All 13 states had to send representatives to this meeting, and any new legislation or laws that they vote on had to be a unanimous yes vote. So that means all 13 states had to agree to it. Imagine how difficult it would be to get everybody. You might be sitting in a classroom right now. Let's say your teacher says, hey, we're going to go out for ice cream. But the only way that we can do that is that if all of you students choose and vote on one flavor. Just imagine how difficult that decision would be. Same problem with the Articles of Confederation. Well, only 7 states show up in Annapolis, so that convention, that meeting can't even get started. And so James Madison, I think, was maybe a little bit relieved because that only gave him more time to research and plan. And Madison and others, they know that they need to bring all the states together in one room. They need to have a meeting of all of the states. So they set a date for May of the following year, 1787, in Philadelphia. And James Madison is a pretty smart guy because he knows that there's one guy in the United States that also needs to be in that room, and that news needs to get out for these other states to hear. Because if they know this guy is in the room, they're going to say, this might be a pretty important meeting and we ought to attend. And that man was George Washington. So James Madison, on the way back from Annapolis, makes a stop at Mount Vernon, and he says, hey, George, we really need you to be in Philadelphia. And it takes a little arm twisting, but eventually Madison convinces George Washington to be in Philadelphia. All right, so let's fast forward. It's May of 1787. James Madison has now spent almost an entire year researching and preparing for this meeting. And he's ready to go. James Madison was kind of known as a little bit of a shy guy. So if there's one time that I can actually imagine him really excited about something, it's this meeting in Philadelphia. And he is so prepared, he's so ready to go, that he arrives in Philadelphia almost 2 weeks ahead of any of the other delegates who are going to attend the Constitutional Convention. Eventually, all of the Virginia delegates arrive, and they come together, and they will draft up what today we call the Virginia Plan. But this is really Madison's brainstorming in almost a year worth of research. And so as soon as the Constitutional Convention starts on May 20th of 1787, I think a lot of those other delegates from those other states are there, and they're thinking that they're just going to put some more Band-Aids on the Articles of Confederation. But as soon as the Virginia Plan is presented, no, we're not going to put any more Band-Aids on this failing system of government. We're going to toss it, and here's our new plan for a new form of government. And so it's really the Virginia Plan that's going to be the basis of the debates during the entire Constitutional Convention. James Madison is there every single day of the convention. Even though there's an elected secretary to take notes during the convention, Madison says, I'm sure you're going to do a good job, buddy, but I'm going to do an even better job. And he takes the most detailed notes. And that comes from the fact that when he was researching, he would often read about a country who had a problem with their form of government, and then he would read about that country's new form of government. But he's saying, what happened in the middle there? How did you go from broken form of government to a new system of government? What happened in those that intervening period of time? And Madison doesn't want the debates at the convention to be lost. So he's taking these very, very detailed notes, going back to his boarding room, transcribing them into longhand almost every night. So a lot of debates, a lot of moments where it looks like the convention might collapse. Delegates might be walking out of the room. But finally, on September 17th of 1787, 39 men signed the Constitution of the United States of America. And in that moment, it meant nothing, nothing, nothing. Because we needed to get it ratified. And unlike under the Articles of Confederation, where we have to get all 13 states on board, This time we only need to get 2/3, so 9 states need to get on board. And quickly some states begin to ratify the Constitution to get people on board with this new framework of government. James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton beginning authoring these anonymous newspaper articles that today we call the Federalist Papers, saying, hey, get on board, let's get this thing ratified. We know it's not a perfect document, but it's a whole lot better than the Articles of Confederation. But then there's a slow up. There are states who are on the fence because they are not seeing something that they want in the Constitution, something that James Madison was totally against when he began his research right here in this room. And they weren't seeing a Bill of Rights. Madison believed that he was going to build individual protections for liberty within this new framework of government, and that a separate listing wasn't necessary. And he also feared if we did have a separate listing, and we left something off, then that's not a right reserved to the citizens. And so he's against it. But then he sees this hang up, and that's what the people are clamoring for. And as he arrives back here in Virginia for the Virginia Ratifying Convention, he sees the same thing. We want a Bill of Rights. And so what he does is essentially says, okay, I was against it at first. I hear you. That's what you want. But I don't want anybody else to do it. I want to do it. So elect me to Congress, and I'll get you your Bill of Rights. And so eventually he does find himself, after the Constitution is ratified, as a member of the first United States Congress, as a member of the House of Representatives. But I don't know if he exactly knew how many amendments might come his way. Over 220 proposed amendments, alterations, and changes came out of these individual state ratifying conventions into his lap. And he has the very difficult task of kind of whittling them down to 12. They go out to the states for ratification, and 10 become the United States Bill of Rights. So, as you might know, James Madison is known as the father of the Constitution. And I've spent the last few minutes describing what Madison did before, during, and after the Constitutional Convention. I absolutely think that James Madison deserves that nickname, Father of the Constitution. He was called the father of the Constitution in his own lifetime. But every single time either somebody would write that to him in a letter, or one time there was a dinner gathering and somebody toasted him as the father of the Constitution, Madison always deflected and downplayed that nickname. And he often replied in kind of a similar way. He said, the Constitution was not the offspring of a single mind, but the work of many heads and many hands. And I think that says a tremendous amount about who this man was, James Madison. He was not doing this work for his own accolades. He wasn't doing it to thump his chest or pat himself on the back. He stepped into this very critical moment in time early on in our country's history. He stepped in, and he really was the lead individual to take us from this critical moment under this failing system of government, the Articles of Confederation, to an entirely new system and framework of government in about a 3-year span of time. So although Madison didn't like that nickname, I think it's a very appropriate one. And if you think about the impact of the United States Constitution on United States history, the work that Madison begins in this room, without a doubt, changes the course and shape of United States history. And if you consider how many other nations around the world have either used in whole or in part some of our ideas, some of these ideas that Madison puts together that end up in the Constitution, and look to our United States Constitution for guidance, the work that Madison does in this room changes the shape of world history. And that all happens here on this plantation in Orange County, Virginia.
Welcome back to the drawing room. I hope you learned a lot while you were upstairs with Kyle. As you have discovered, my husband, James Madison, was known as the father of the Constitution. This video has focused on his role in the development of the government of the United States. Remember, though, that Mr. Madison himself stated that the Constitution was the work of many heads and many hands. To be sure, all of the men who participated in the Constitutional Convention, and all of those behind the scenes, to include wives, daughters, sons, sisters, brothers, fathers, and mothers of those men, Even the women who ran the boarding houses where many delegates lived during the convention, like Mary House, who ran the boarding house where Mr. Madison stayed during his time in Philadelphia, are deserving of recognition. We must also acknowledge those who were in service to the delegates, in servitude to them, and enslaved by them. What was begun in 1787 remains a work in progress. The preamble to the Constitution begins, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." Not the perfect union, a more perfect union. And to that end, our Constitution was created to be changeable, adaptable through amendments. The delegates at the Constitutional Convention knew the world would change. They knew the needs of our citizens would change. They may very well have even guessed that the designation of citizen would apply to an ever-widening group of people over time. Because of this, we here in the United States have the world's longest surviving written charter of government. And we can continue toward the goal of establishing a more and more perfect union. Thank you for joining us here at Montpelier today. Montpelier is a museum of American history and a center for constitutional education that engages the public with the enduring legacy of Mr. Madison's most powerful idea: government by the people. I would like to thank a number of people who helped make this video possible. Maybe most importantly, I'd like to thank the folks out at James Madison's Montpelier, to include Elizabeth Chu, who helped us coordinate and let us go out there and get a bunch of photos and videos that we were able to use here for you, and then Kyle Stetz, who you got to know well during the course of this video, whose knowledge is just extraordinary, and we're so thankful. There are some other folks on the committee to put this video together besides myself. My name is Dawn Bryant. But in addition to me, we had Lori Graham. She's the regent of the Dolley Madison Chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. And then we also had Vicki Timmons and Amy Middleman, without whom I would not have been able to pull this off. So I want to say thank you to them. And then we also want to say thank you to you. And I have a few friends here with me to say thank you to you. Here's Dolly. She wants to say thank you. And of course, James, he's here too. And George, where are you, George? Here's George. Oh, there he is. All right. So, okay. Why are you turning your back on everybody, George? Let's see. All right. There we go. And of course, we got to throw Alexander Hamilton in there, Federalist Papers. He was integral to getting that Constitution ratified, right? And then, of course, little Thomas, who was in Paris during the Constitutional Convention, but sent all those books that James Madison used to do his work, to build that document. On behalf of all of us and everyone else who worked on this video, thank you for your attention, and thank you for celebrating Constitution Week 2021 with all of us.